and Irish genealogy. So I'm very excited to share some of these resources with you. This will be a beefy program, I'm not going to lie. So we're going to try to get through the content as much as possible. Now, all the things I'm going to talk about are in the very lengthy handout you all have. For those of you who are online, the handout is on ACGSI's website, and some friends will be putting that in the chat throughout the program. So let's go ahead and jump on in. So this is just kind of the game plan of what we're going to talk about. There are a lot of challenges in doing Irish genealogy research, namely record loss in particular. We're also going to talk about the historical context for doing Irish genealogy research. Some of that is meant for your own sanity. I say that because historical context dictates the records. So what's going on in Ireland in a certain point in history, and how is that going to affect what records you can or can't find? And then we'll get into some essential online resources for Irish genealogy, as well as some kind of tips and strategies for doing Irish research. So let's first talk about some of those challenges I mentioned. So first being record loss. So this building, you can kind of sort of see the smoke in the background. That is the Four Courts building, and that is where the Public Records Office of Ireland is located. And one could say caught on fire, it really exploded. During the first event of the Irish Civil War, they were storing munitions in the building, and it was attacked, and the roof caught on fire, and we lost 700 years of archival material. So if you have been just kind of getting started in doing Irish research, and you're like, why is this hard? Why is this harder than American research? This is why. Also, there's an incomplete civil registration of births, marriages, and deaths before 1864. It just isn't complete. Also, just common surnames and naming patterns, like how many Joseph Moores exist in the world? I'm going to say a lot. And then changing place names and judicial or jurisdictional boundaries. So place names can be a little complicated, namely because they will be called one thing in the Irish language, and then English-speaking people writing it down are going to write it phonetically, and then it would just evolve over time. So it makes things a little challenging, which we'll get into. And also just mass immigration led to scattered records across multiple countries. So yes, this is a little grim, I'm not going to lie, but there are things you can do to kind of piece together your family story. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about Irish immigration patterns. So between 1870, well, not 1870, 1700, I should say, all the way up through until the famine, it's mostly going to be Ulster Scots coming to the colonial American destinations. There's also another post-Revolutionary War surge, but a lot of the motivation is going to be religious or economic. A lot of these people were Protestants. There were some Catholics thrown in there, but it was primarily Protestants in this era. By the time we get to the famine era, so that's going to be 1845 to 1850-ish, you're going to have a mass exodus of people. About 2 million people will immigrate. About 2 million people will die in the famine. So these are going to be primarily for rural Catholics, but they continue chain migration. So what I mean by that is that you might have people coming over alone, but they'll send remittances back so that their family can follow. That didn't end with the famine, that continued on for generations. And then we have these later waves from 1880-ish through 1930. These are people who are going to be a lot more educated. They'll be most likely literate, most likely have skilled professions. So to put things into perspective, between 1845 and 1921, about approximately 5 million people left. So when we get that mass exodus starting in 1845, it doesn't just end, it goes on for generations. And that's namely because Ireland was poor for generations. Now, key destination places, so primary destination ports in the US are going to be like New York, so Ellis Island, and also pre-Ellis Island, Castle Garden, Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and then even some cities in the South like New Orleans, which is where I'm originally from, and Galveston, Texas. But you'll also have other destinations too. The Irish didn't just go straight to the United States. Some of them went to the UK first, some of them went to Canada, and from Canada they might cross the border that way. You had others that went to Australia, New Zealand, all kinds of places. So, finding Irish immigration records, there are some limited surviving Irish departure lists that are going to be early, but it's kind of hit or miss. You'll get more of them once you get later into the 18th, 19th century and early 20th century. You can find them in a couple different places. Center for Migration Studies, National Archives of Ireland, they have some good holdings, as well as just looking in the usual American places. So, passenger lists from ancestry.com, naturalization records, that's another good way to find how did someone come into the country. There's also things like immigrant letters and memoirs. There's also something called the Immigrant Savings Bank, which in your handout, there is a link to a presentation I gave a few years ago on the Immigrant Savings Bank in New York. Those records are really, really good. And if you have an Irish person in New York City, definitely look at those because those records will say when a person came over, who their members were in Ireland, which is unheard of. And even the tiniest little town, not even a town, like today you could drive through it and you wouldn't even know you drove through it. Some of the tiniest place names are listed there. So they're pretty cool. So if you get
Where you said that was at.
it's in the handout. It's on our YouTube channel. I can answer, yeah, I can answer more questions about the Immigrant Savings Bank, but it's a really cool resource. Some of it is online, some of it is not. So it's kind of hit or miss in that way. But you also have other things like the UK census, Canadian border crossings, Australian convict or free settler records. It all kind of depends on where people went to. Even if it's not your direct person, say your ancestor had a sibling that went off to Australia, research them too, because you might find clues in those records. Now, another thing to look for would be newspaper notices of departures, passport applications, missing friends advertisements. So newspapers are great resources as well. As well,
Mostly American newspapers, or are there any Irish newspapers that would be helpful?
that's a good question. So for those on Zoom who might not have been able to hear, the question was, is that just United States newspapers or Irish newspapers as well? Both. I'm going to end up talking more about some Irish newspapers a little later on, but the way to find those, I recommend a couple of Irish newspaper databases. If you live around the library, if you live around here, we subscribe to Find My Pass and the British newspaper archive through the British Library. Those you can get into for free in the library. Find My Pass is a great resource in general for just Irish research in general because it has a connection with the National Archives of the UK. Okay. So these three people on the screen, I'm only showing their pictures because a lot of my examples come from them. So in the middle, Samuel Nevin Hodges, he was my great-grandfather, and the lady next to him on the right, that is Margaret McCann. She's my great-grandmother. And then the lady all the way on the left, her name is Marguerite Mabel Moore. She is not related to me in any way, but I've been researching her for over a decade because she's just fascinating and she's like my white whale. I will never stop researching her. So I just want to quickly show three pictures of these lovely people. The reason why I wanted to show examples from three different people is because all of those records I mentioned, you're not necessarily going to find all of them for every single person. So we're going to show a little bit of, maybe a little bit of everything. So the first example would be this ship manifest. So this is from later in the year of 1916 in October, and this is actually my great-grandmother, Maggie Ann McCann. She's all the way at the bottom. Come on. No. There we go. Okay, so Maggie McCann and my great-grandfather, Samuel Hodges, they both immigrated in 1916 to New Orleans, primarily because the Easter Rising happened in 1916. Dublin was burning. It was not a great place to be. So if you look at the bottom, you have her surname, her first name. Now she went by Maggie Ann, which is very, very sweet. Says that she is 26 years old, female. She's single at the time. Now she was engaged to my great-grandfather, so he worked for United Fruit Company. and he didn't want to go back to Ireland, so he just got off the ship in New Orleans and stayed. He did not go through Ellis Island, so technically he would have been an undocumented immigrant, but he sent money back to his intended to come over to New Orleans so they could get married. And she was working as a domestic servant, which you can kind of see that, not on this page, but on the next one. But this right here, it says where she was living at the time. So this is her last permanent residence. It says Ballsbridge. Ballsbridge is a part, like a neighborhood in Dublin. It's very affluent. She was working as a domestic servant, so she was probably living in the place that she worked. And it also lists her parents' names down here and where they lived in Enniskillen. So her parents, it just says Mr. and Mrs. F. McCann. So Felix McCann was her dad's name. Now, the other side of the page, we got final destination. She is going to Louisiana, going to New Orleans. She's meeting up with, well, who paid her passage. It says Samuel Hodges. Over in this column, 18, it says whether going to join a relative or a friend. If so, what's your relationship and what is their address? And it says that he is her intended, and it lists where he's living. Now, good thing to remember is that not all passenger lists are super detailed like this one. This one I'm showing you right now, this is from April 28th, 1884. So this is actually from Marguerite Moore, who I mentioned a moment ago. She immigrated after, I believe, the death of her husband, or she left her husband, so can't decide yet. Still researching her. But she was 37 years old. Her occupation is listed as a lady, which is fascinating. And she is traveling with 3 of her children. So the oldest is 17. Her name was Philomena. And then she had Master Thomas and Miss Clara. So they're 5 and 6. She would have other children who were adults that would come over at another time. You see, this isn't a whole lot of information, unlike that other one I showed you. So some of this kind of depends on the year of the passenger list, how detailed it is. Another thing to look for is naturalization records. So this is for my great-grandfather, Samuel Nevin Hodges. The top part, I wanted to zoom in on because it has a lot of good information. It says what ship he came over on, which is a little interesting. Because remember I said he worked for a company called United Fruit. So they would leave from Ireland, go down to South America. Well, they'd stop in New York and New Orleans, go down to South America, and then make their way back. He didn't, this was not quite the way that he's saying it is. Not quite. But it also lists, his 3 children, the oldest being my grandfather, and where they were all born, all that good stuff. Now, you can use information like this to then go find the passenger list. So if you have someone who is naturalizing, see if you can find a document like this. If it's a little earlier than this, it might not be that detailed, but still, just try to look for it. If you can't find it, that's what the librarians here are for. We're here to help. But it can give you a date of arrival, it can give you a ship, and then you can go find that passenger list for more information. Now, with that petition for naturalization, this is a certificate of arrival. It also says, his day of arrival says it's the Cedric, but at the very bottom, this certificate does not purport to verify the landing or admission of the alien named. And the reason why was because he was a deserting alien seaman. So that actually proved the theory that he just got off the boat and stayed. This is just a different naturalization. So this is actually for Marguerite Moore. It took me a long time to find this, and I only know for sure that this is her because I recognize her signature. I've seen this woman's signature enough to where I'm like, this is the right lady. I was only able to find this using family searches, relatively new full text search. If anyone has questions about full text search, I'm happy to answer them after, but basically the AI can read the handwriting for those who are not familiar with it. It has saved countless time and helped me find records that I spent years looking for. But notice her naturalization record has like no information on it. And that's really because of when she did it. So this is from 1887. Now the census is another fun thing. So this is the 1910 census showing Marguerite with her kids. Now, what's kind of interesting about this one, or I find it interesting, So list for age, it lists all kinds of other good stuff, but under like these columns over here will be for language, so native language of Marguerite and both of her parents. I can tell you I've researched this woman enough to know, based on where she was from in Ireland and the type of family she was in, Irish was not her first language. It was English, but she was big into Irish politics and she was a revolutionary. This is a revolutionary thing. She was telling the enumerator, I didn't speak English, I spoke Irish. She also would write on other census her occupation is writer, which is funny because the enumerator first wrote that her occupation was keeping house and it scratched out. And I guess she gave them the business about it. But anyway, so this is one of the ones that says writer, but that's not the one where they scratched it out. And it lists, the occupations of, her kids, her daughters, a manager at a bakery, all that good stuff. Now, this is when they are living in the Bronx. This family moved to like every borough in the city of New York and ended up living in Brooklyn. I mean, not Brooklyn, New Jersey, and then ended up moving to Westchester when she died in 1933. Now, these are just some of the online resources for Irish immigration records. I have all this information in a handout as far as like what are the key ones to look for within each database. Ancestry and Family Search are really great for those passenger lists, both United States and the UK passenger list, because sometimes you'll find a passenger list of someone going into Liverpool because you're not necessarily going to take a direct boat to hear from Ireland. A lot of people went from Ireland all the way to Liverpool and then to the United States or Canada or elsewhere. You might not find a record for that Ireland to Liverpool thing because depending on the decade, they might have been on a cattle march. Those records also weren't kept because Ireland was colony. It's like saving a transatlantic record. Not transatlantic. It's like saving a flight record for within the United States. It's not super exciting because it wasn't considered international exactly, but you will have departure lists. Those aren't as detailed as the United States incoming lists because they didn't really care about who was leaving. They only cared about who was coming in. There's also, if your people were in New York for a little while, there's also the Catholic records for the New York Archdiocese. Those are on Find My Past, as well as some other things. Naturalization records, family searches I mentioned earlier. Now, there was a question about newspapers. There are some Irish American newspapers on newspapers.com. I recommend looking at those ethnic newspapers for the United States because they can have really good information in them. Sometimes things like incoming, like the names of incoming people or looking for family members, that kind of thing. But there's also other newspaper databases like these ones I listed below. So Irish Newspaper Archives, which is a subscription database. A lot of the local and national Irish newspapers are going to live on the British Newspaper Archive, which you can get into in here for free. All that good stuff. So history dictates what records exist and which records survive to the modern era. So this is just a timeline of events and how it relates to genealogy. So 1801, we get the Act of Union. That will create what is known as the United Kingdom and Ireland. Northern Ireland does not exist as it does right now yet. 1923, we get something called the tithe allotment books, which I'll talk a little bit about in a few minutes, but basically those are records where people are having to pay tithes to the Church of Ireland. And then we get the famine, about 1 million or so die, another 2 million immigrate. And then by 1847 to 64, we get something called Griffith's valuation. So that is going to list heads of household. It's meant to determine how much to tax people. We get the 1864 civil registration for all births and deaths. And then there's something called the land wars in the 1870s. So basically, that's like a whole other program, but it's tenant farmers fighting for their rights because Ireland at the time, at this point, the property was owned by only 700 families. Everybody else was renting. So you can be evicted at any time, and that's what made the famine so horrible. It wasn't just the repeated crop failures, it was the mass evictions and then additional illness, and that just equals mass death. So you got all that stuff going on. Notice I haven't mentioned a census. So all the censuses for Ireland pre-1901 were pulped during World War I by the British government because they needed paper. So we don't have a surviving complete census until 1901. It's really depressing. And then we get another census in 1911. We don't get another one again until 1926, and that is not released yet. It will be released soon, within like, I think a few weeks actually. Easter Rising, it's rebellion against British rule, and then the partition of Ireland in 1921. 1922 is when we lose all those records. So that kind of helps you kind of picture in your head, okay, what exists at what time frame and why? Why are things missing? So just to kind of go over the Four Courts thing, this was a multi-day siege, and it's described as Ireland's memory lost. I mean, you had people who worked in the public records office, these women, like digging through rubble and picking up papers and just chucking papers in boxes as quickly as they could before they lost it all. Some of it survived. So the civil registration survived just because they weren't in that building, they were elsewhere. Same deal with the 1901 and 1911 census. They were luckily not there in the building. Catholic parish registers were kept in the local parishes. So noticing a theme here, the things that we have that are more complete, they're complete because they weren't there. Now there are some recovery efforts. There's a project called Beyond 2022, where the Virtual Record Treasury of Ireland, they have digitized replacement records. So a lot of these records that were destroyed, there were copies of it left in archives in London. So, because remember, it's a colony, so they got to have copies of everything. It is not comprehensive, the Virtual Record Treasury of Ireland. It is not an easy website to look through. I'll show you what the homepage looks like. I have another presentation on how to use it that is linked in your handout. But it's a pretty cool project that is continuously being built on. So like check back every like 6 months or so and see, can you find something else? This is what the website looks like. If you are searching in this website, just remember it's not made for genealogists. It's really not. Try searching just the last name. You'll get all kinds of crazy things if you try to do a first and last name. Even in quotes, it will search both names separately. It won't put them together. It's really annoying. Usually the better way to search in this is to click this browse the treasury button, which it's a whole process. So if you want more information on that, definitely take a look at that other presentation. So Ireland, it is not like the United States when it comes to like administrative divisions of things. So I kind of made this little handy chart to kind of explain it a little bit. So you got Ireland, and then it's broken up into provinces. I couldn't do it for every county, but here's just an example. So within a province, you're going to have a county, and then within a county, you'll have civil parishes and then townlands. So townlands are the smallest, division that exists. Now, why does this matter? Records are organized by the divisions. So you might actually have a civil parish that might be the same name as a county. You might have a city that is the same name as a county, same name as a civil parish, but they're not always the same, like covering the same geographic area. So that's why maps are really helpful. And just kind of understanding place names. So there, as I said a little earlier, there's been a big evolution of Irish place names. So originally they're going to be in Irish, and then they were anglicized starting in the 1600s through until 1921. They were phonetically written down by English speakers who had no idea what they were hearing. So you're going to have crazy spellings of things. Spelling doesn't count in genealogy. Just remember, keep that mantra in your head. Spelling doesn't count. And also the administrative boundaries for things, they did shift over time. Now, I mentioned a townland is the smallest. There's over 60,000 that exist. So there are a lot of them. Now, primary online resources for searching townland names, because sometimes you'll see the name of a townland in a passenger list. You'll look at it, it's like, what in God's name does that say? First off, because sometimes that handwriting is real bad. Sometimes it's like deeply misspelled. So you kind of got to do a little investigating. This first one, it is pronounced Luggenham, I believe. My Irish is rusty. It is a free database to use, and it's like the official Irish place names database. It's really good for the historical name and the modern name and all the variations. Townlands.ie is another one, and I'll also show you those administrative districts visually. John Grimes' Irish Ancestors is a phenomenal website, which I'll show you a little bit of that in a moment, but also looking at ordnance survey maps. So these maps were drawn by the British government over decades, and they will show you the tiniest little place that might not even exist anymore, but would have existed when your people lived there, and they might have lived there. Now, this box in the bottom left corner, Shane Wilson's Compendium, this is another free resource. I'm actually related to Shane kind of distantly. My great-great-grandfather had a sister, and Shane's a descendant of her, which is kind of cool. But it's a really, really helpful resource for finding where things are and where things live. I'll show his website a little bit, but I highly recommend just kind of digging through it. But it's a cross-reference tool, if that makes sense, for navigating like the parish boundaries in conjunction with those other like civil registration districts. Okay, so this is Luggenham. So I just searched for this place called Greencastle. So this is, I just know this is in County Donegal. So I scroll down here, there's a number of them that I think this is actually the one that I would want. Yep. When you click on it, you'll see the area. This is on the Inishowen Peninsula, so this is like the furthest northest point of Ireland. It would be very cold and very rainy. The weather would be miserable. And this is where that Lady Marguerite Moore lived at one point. Now, when you see this page, you can scroll down and get even more information. But over here, you have a hierarchy of what a county is it, what barony is it, what civil parish is it. Civil parish is not the same thing as religious parish, which is something mind-boggling. It is how it is. And then you have electoral division and townland. So John Bredham's website, this website is pretty cool. I will say it's free-ish. So you have this surname search. This has a soft paywall, which means you can search a couple of surnames. If you have a name that's a little more unusual, not like Murphy or O'Connor or something. I have an ancestor with the last name Nevin. That's a little more unusual. You can search in this and I'll show you where, like the number of instances on a map of that surname, and it links to other records. So it's pretty cool. What I like to do when I run out of free pages, I'll just use another browser. So like I said, soft paywall. Now this places button, I find this really helpful. The places button is free. So you can put in a place name, you can put in a county if you know it. If you don't know it, that's okay. If you don't quite know the spelling, you can put asterisks or question marks. So it does wildcard searches. So this is a map of all the civil parishes in Ireland. Now, if I wanted to look at County Donegal, I would click on that and then it would show me the civil parishes for just Donegal. And then I wanted to look at a particular one. Now, you have a map down here, and this is all clickable, which is pretty nice. But you can click on this and a drop down will come down with links to other resources like maps, what kind of surnames, like how many of each surname is in this area in certain points in time. If you click the places button, it will narrow that down even further and give you a list of like those tiny places I mentioned. And then this button is research sources for mobile, so for the area. Not all of those are online, but you can, if it's a book, copy the book and then paste it in the library's catalog and see if we have it. Now this is Shane Wilson's website. Not always as pretty as John Brenham's, but it is a really good resource. So if I just look at Donegal, it will show me a list of all the registration districts, the county, and then you have dispensary districts. Don't worry about this. This is like not that important, especially if you're just getting started, but it will plot these things out on a map. And it will also tell you the nearby parishes as well. So if you can't find someone in one place, look in all the places around you think they were living. Yep. Am I going the right direction? Yep. Yes. There's also this Townland index and database. This is from 1851. So, like I mentioned, a lot of place names had their names changed. So, the further back in time you go, the more likely you'll find a match to what you're seeing if you're seeing something in the United States. The key to remember when you're doing research, though, in the United States is you can't jump the pond too soon. Find every piece of paper you can for a family in the US or Canada or wherever they are before you start trying to find them over in the old country, because those scraps of paper you didn't think you needed, it might actually have that little bit of information that can tell you where they're from. So vital records, baptismal records, marriage records, not just for your person, but everyone in their orbit. So here's some of those research strategies. I already kind of started with some of this, but first being start with what you know. This is kind of the beginning of all genealogy research. You just kind of start with what you know and then just start working backwards. Now, I mentioned just now the first challenge is figuring out where they're from in Ireland. A lot of people are like, I know my person is Irish, but I don't know where they're from. That's a really common thing, and it is a pain, but there are ways to try to figure it out. So looking through those vital records, looking at obituaries, looking at headstones. Sometimes people's headstones will say where they're from, but also keep in mind sometimes it's a lie. Well, not a lie, but they don't. Some people, the person who is creating the headstone for their parent, sibling, whoever. Well, certainly not sibling, but parent, grandparent. They might assume that their person was from a particular place, and they might be wrong, because the information that they have is only as good as what has been told to them. And some people don't share information with their kids and grandkids. So once you've kind of sussed things out, then start accessing these Irish records. So the key record things to look for is civil registration records if you fit within the date range of those records, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then your church records, census if it's available, land records if possible. And then you just kind of cross-reference multiple sources. It's kind of like being a conspiracy theorist, right? You're just trying to connect the dots. This is why things like genealogy can be easier for people who are not Irish, because not everyone has to do it quite like this. So as far as overcoming those brick walls, like where you're stuck, cluster research. So that is researching everybody to death. I'm talking all of various family members, neighbors, godparents, everybody. And also tracking boundary changes of, did this parish change boundaries? Did this, county change names? Like I said, spelling doesn't count in genealogy. And also DNA testing. We won't get into that because that's like a whole other presentation. But if you do that, test multiple people, as many family members as you can, and try to focus on those surname matches, unless it's something like Moore or Murphy or O'Connor. Then come talk to us and we'll get you sorted. I'm not going to dwell on this because we don't have a ton of time, but anyone who wants to take a screenshot of this or take a picture of it, you're more than welcome to. But what I was saying about the cluster research and researching everyone to death, it helps you overcome some of those record loss issues and helps identify specific places of origin, getting through those brick walls, all that good stuff. So the types of records you'll want to examine are going to be the passenger list that I mentioned, the census records, both in the old country and the new, if you can access them, because some people, if your person immigrated before the 1901 census, you're kind of in trouble, but that's okay. The church records, land and property. Now, something to keep in mind, I mentioned that most people didn't own their property. You do want to look at things like will records, even though technically they didn't own their property, they owned the right to tenantship. So that is the thing that is passed down from generation to the next. It's your right to occupy. Pre-famine, those laws are a little loosey-goosey. You would split your inheritance amongst your children evenly. After the famine, those change and it becomes the oldest son. So that's when you start to get a lot of young Irish women traveling alone because they're inheriting nothing, and there's a lot of uneligible bachelors in Ireland. So they go to US or Canada or elsewhere, get a job, send money back, maybe meet a husband who will, take the entire family out of poverty, but that sounds like a novel. But it was a thing. You did have a lot of women traveling alone, actually more so than men. So that's just some of the strategies to kind of go through, keeping them like following the entire family through chain migration, all that good stuff. Now tracking people from the same townland. If you're looking at a really small place, research everybody because I'm telling you, everyone's related to each other, especially if you're talking about the rural West. Everyone's related to one another. Okay, so I'm not going to focus on this because my colleague John actually gave a really good presentation on this topic, which again is linked in your handout, but the Irish love their naming patterns and they're pretty, even the Protestants they like them. And it's kind of like a formula. So for example, so first son will be named after a paternal grandfather. So my great grandfather, he was named Samuel Nevin Hodges. His grandfather, paternal grandfather, was Samuel Hodges. We like to call him Samuel Hodges Coast Guard because there are too many. So we basically identify him by occupation. But his middle name, Nevin, was his grandmother's maiden name. So, and they were Protestant, well, Protestantish. So you do get some very common names, a lot of repeat names, but there is, if you look closely enough, there is a little bit of a formula to it. Okay, so key Irish record types. So there's vital records, so that's going to be civil registration and religious. Census and census substitutes. So even though all those censuses were destroyed, you can find things like census substitutes, which I'll talk a little bit about. Court records, that's going to be the wills and the probate, higher courts. So if you have people who are misbehaving, it's real helpful, as well as newspapers. Okay, so here's just a brief timeline of the civil registration and records. So pre-civil registration era, so that's 1845 to 1864. There's no official state registration for births, marriages, or deaths. You will actually have non-Catholic marriages in this time frame. So if they're Protestant, you can probably find a record for it that was registered by the government. But you do have other records in there. So the Poor Law Union records, so that's the workhouse. You have the famine going on in that time frame. Griffith's valuation, which I said earlier, that's how they determined how much to charge people in taxes. Now you do have some census fragments that survived. They are not complete and they're not for every county, but if you can find one, it's gold. Now you do get some early civil registration for marriages. And then you also have births and deaths and all that good stuff. The date on here for Catholic marriages is incorrect. This should be 1864. But I digress. So those were done by the General Register Office, the GRO. So because they were done by the government, they might just have different information than those religious records. So even if you find a baptismal record, still look for these civil records if your people fit within the right date range. We get to the independence era, and then you're going to get separate general register offices. You're going to get one for Northern Ireland, and you're going to get one for just the Republic. Well, the Free State, which would become the Republic. Look in both. So PRONI, the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland, or GRONI is the General Register Office of Northern Ireland. Look in both, especially if your people lived in a border county. So like my great grandmother was from Enniskillen, which is in County Fermanagh. There are going to be records in both Northern Ireland and Belfast and in Dublin. Always look in both, especially if they're close to the border. As far as modern access, a lot of things are on a website called irishgenealogy.ie. So that will cover the Republic. But if we're talking about records that were created before the partition of Ireland in 1921, they will live in Dublin in this irishgenealogy.ie website. But I would still, when you can, go through Prony and get some of those other records. But those are not all online. That is the nidirect.gov.uk. That's their website. You have a free index, but they're a little stingy with their records. It's not quite as easily accessible. Grony, some of their stuff is online. There's also commercial websites like Find My Past, Ancestry, Family Search. So just as an example, I have my favorites for doing this research. I'm not going to lie to y'all, I don't like Ancestry for using the Civil Registration's birth index. I'd rather go to the Irish government's website, that irishgenealogy.ie, because notice there's no link to the image. Yes, okay, if you're the kind of person who is cool with going through the digitized microfilm on Family Search, that's what this FHL film number is. If you don't know what that is, I can explain it during Q&A if we got time, but you could also send us an email for those who are on Zoom, if you want help with that. But again, this doesn't give you enough information. This birthplace, Clifton, that's not a civil registration district. This doesn't even give you enough to go find it on irishgenealogy.ie. So a lot of people using Ancestry who are creating trees will see something like this, it doesn't have enough information, they're like, this is the right person, and then link it to their tree, and it could be the totally wrong person. So don't trust the trees on Ancestry. They are often really, really wrong when it comes to Irish stuff. So I wanted to see what the record actually looked like. So I wanted to go to irishgenealogy.ie. I searched her name. Now, if you click on this advanced options button, you can put in a year range, you can select the event type, you can even put the mother's surname. Doesn't always work, and I'll show you why. But you can just put in a little information. If you don't know the civil registration district, don't worry about it. But it is not divided up by county. So sometimes you have to go through and like Google the list of civil registration districts to determine what county is it actually in, unless you just magically know, or you just have those resources bookmarked that I mentioned. So I did find Philomena Moore. Now, notice mother's birth surname, no, that's not her surname. That means that they just didn't fill it out in the index. So if you click on view record image, it will show you the page. So we got Philomena Mary Louisa. She is born September of 1864. And it said that she is born in Sline Head, which is a lighthouse. Her father, John Henry Moore, who's listed in this column, he was the head lighthouse keeper. Oops. He was a head lighthouse keeper, which is kind of an interesting job. And it lists the mother's name, Margaret Adelaide Moore, formerly Nagel. So these are really great for finding a woman's maiden name, which is not always the easiest. And then we got the signature qualification and residence of the informant. So this person, Catherine Dungarvin, I think is her name, she was just there at the birth. So might have been a friend, might have been the wife of another lighthouse keeper. Hard to say. And this is just the signature of the registrar, so nothing exciting there. But at the top, you'll see the district. In this case, Clifton is a district, but this is part of County Galway. But that's not always the case when you see that index on Ancestry. Sometimes it's not the civil registration district. Just to show you a different one, so this is a marriage from 1854. This is from my great grandparents, Samuel Hodges, Coast Guard. It even says on here that he worked for the Coast Guard, which was originally called the Preventative Water Guard, and he married his wife Catherine Nevin, who was pretty young. He was 34 years older than her. She was not his first wife, but they got married in County Cork in this area called Blackrock, and they got married in the chapel of St. Michael, and it lists the names of both of their fathers and their professions, which is pretty helpful if this information is correct. Because I think Samuel Hodges, I think he actually lied about who his father was, but that's a whole other story. And then down here we got the witnesses as well. So Andrew Nevin, we can assume is the same Andrew Nevin, or it's a brother, also named Andrew Nevin. Okay, now anyone who wants to take a picture of this, you can, or if you want to take a screenshot, I do have information about this in the handout, but this is just some historical context about the Irish Catholic parish registers. Pre 1700, there are very few that survive. 1700 to really 1800, you start to get records being created. They're kind of limited. More parishes are keeping them, but it's really inconsistent. By 1800 to really through the famine, we get a lot more parishes maintaining their registers. And then from 1864 onwards, they're pretty parallel with those civil registrations that are created by the government. Now, there are some historical challenges with these, primarily the penal laws. If you want more information about that, Google's your friend, but basically it will suppress Catholic worship until 1829. And then you just have poor record keeping conditions, and there wasn't really a standard format for these records. So sometimes they'll have a lot of information, sometimes they will have like not that much. So those primary records are going to be the baptismal records, marriage records, and birth and death registers. Those are less common than the other two, but if you can't find it online, contact the parish, contact the church. These churches are usually like kind of delighted to hear from us, which is really interesting because I think they're busy with requests. But if you contact them and say, "Hey, do you have this? Does it still exist?" They're more than happy to help you. So as far as online access goes, there's free access through the National Library of Ireland to digitized microfilm. So that's going to be a little over 1,000 parishes across Ireland. It's primarily baptisms and marriages. It's unindexed, but you can find indexes to these records on Ancestry, on Find My Past, and Family Search. So you can find those elsewhere. Now, when you're searching, see if you can identify the parish. If not, come talk to us at the library. We'll help you. See if there have been boundary changes with the parish, and always try to look at the parishes around it, because people move around. Always search for variant spellings, because again, spelling doesn't count. And try to look at the Latin names for names. Like there's a Latin version of Michael, there's a Latin version of William. Like look at all of those and see, because in the Catholic records, that's usually how they're listed. Also, research the godparents. Okay. Okay, so one way of doing this is how I would do this in Ancestry, which you can get into for free at the library. You can go to the card catalog in Ancestry. If you click search and then filter to Ireland and then put Catholic under birth, marriages, and deaths, you'll get 13 different record sets. Choose the ones that have the most amount of records, like this one that's 25 million. But search through a number of them because they don't always have the same record sets. Why? I could not really tell you. Usually because it came from different institutions. So you can search through these different ones and see what you get. So just as an example, I searched for Margaret Adelaide Nagel. Notice her main name is McNagel in this one. This is one of her daughters, Matilda Moore, and this is for baptism in Moville, which is in Donegal, in Greencastle specifically. Now, I wanted a little more information. I wanted to see if I could just find something different. So I searched for Margaret Nagel again with her spouse, John Henry Moore, on Family Search, which is free for those who haven't used it before. Does require an account, but they don't spam your email. So their Catholic parish register, it's like 1740 through 1900. So when I search in there, I get a number of people. Some people are not the person I'm looking for, but these top three are records for Marguerite's children. So she did have another daughter named Mary Jane Nagel, and this is the record for her. But notice there's no image here. There's no link to the image. So if I want to look at the image itself, I would then go to the National Library of Ireland. So if you just do a Google search, National Library of Ireland, Catholic, this comes up immediately. So you can either put in the parish name, but if you don't know it, you can just click on the map. It shows you the county map, and you just click on the county you're looking for, and you can kind of whittle it down by there. So in this case, I wanted to look at mobile, and it will tell you where, what date ranges. This is, again, all digitized microfilms. So sometimes people are looking for something online over and over and over again. Why can't I find it? Why can't I find it? If you go to this page, you'll see, oh, it's because it's not digitized and it hasn't been indexed, because most of those indexes come from this set of microfilm. However, down here, Irish Ancestors and Roots Ireland. Irish Ancestors is John Grenham's website. Not insanely helpful for what I'm about to say, but Roots Ireland is. If you can't find it anywhere, Roots Ireland is subscription based, but I think you can do like a 24-hour thing. That's what I like to do. I'll mad dash, search some names, and then cancel. But it's good for Protestant records. It's good for Catholic records that just haven't been digitized. So if I want to actually look at the thing that's on the National Library's website, I would click on the reel that makes sense to me date range wise. This is the whole thing. It's not indexed, it's not searchable, but that's why you wrote down the date from that index. If you write down the date, you can then select record type, the year, the month, you press apply, and it will bring you down. So just for the sake of time, I zoomed in a lot on this because these are not easy to read. So we have Mary Jane, and then Margaret Adelaide. We have the names of the parents, names of godparents, and then location, Greencastle. So the records beyond Catholic parishes, there's a lot of them. Church of Ireland, a really good book for that is Researching Your Scots-Irish Ancestors. Even if they are not Scots-Irish, it still says in this book, which is listed in the handout, where records for Church of Ireland, Presbyterian records, Methodist Quakers as well, where all of those live. Like what archives they live in and who you need to contact. Because in this case, most of the Protestant stuff is just not online. So try contacting those different archives as well as these repositories listed over here. So that's Public Records Office in Northern Ireland, Representative Church Body Library, that's for C of I, Church of Ireland, and then just kind of keep digging through here. Now, I mentioned Roots Ireland. Now, my great-grandfather, he was baptized in both the Church of Ireland and the Catholic Church. He is a unique unicorn in that way, because his father was Protestant, his mother was Catholic. We don't believe they were ever married. It was very scandalous at the time. So I just searched his name, made it kind of vague. You can select a county. You don't necessarily have to. You can add in a little more information to narrow down the search. But if a name is kind of a weird one where there might be a lot of variant spellings, it will automatically search variant spellings. Now, I did find him. Now, I couldn't find his Catholic record online. This is a transcript of the Catholic record. If I wanted the original, I'd have to contact the parish. Now, remember how I said that some of those Catholic records have more information than others? There's a note for his. It says that he was 7 months old at the time of his baptism, and the father is a Protestant, which scandalous. And his father was also a railway porter. And it lists the name of the mother, one of the sponsors, all that good stuff. What's kind of interesting is that he said his entire life, according to my father, that his birthday was January 1st. He was like very proud to be born on New Year's Day. So maybe this is an error in the original record. It's hard to say, but he was born in the city of Cavan, in County Cavan, which is not confusing at all, right? Now, his Church of Ireland record, it gives the address of where they're living, which is these railway cottages for railway employees. Doesn't give sassy notes like the Irish priest wrote, but it still gives information. Again, it lists that birthday is January 31st. Maybe he didn't know his birthday. That happened. But it is kind of interesting to note. And to note that he got baptized earlier in the Church of Ireland than he did in the Catholic Church. Okay, so the census. I'm not going to go in an insane amount of detail. We talked about the available censuses. Census substitutes. Griffith's evaluation, which I mentioned, that's going to be done every couple of years. It only lists the heads of household, but it can help you kind of figure out where people are in a given year. There are also maps associated with it, so you can sometimes find where somebody is living. The tithe allotment book says beginning in 1823. This is like the best they're going to get for a census. Again, only heads of household. And then there are these census fragments, and they are far and few between. There's also a religious census that was done in the 1740s, 1760s. And then earlier than that, there's also the tax lists and hearth money rolls. If you're somebody researching in 17th century Ireland, I am not the one for you, but my colleague John is. I'm more of a 19th century kind of person. But as far as like additional resources, there's land valuation office revision books. This is like kind of in the weeds, some of this stuff. And then finding those records online, there's the National Archives of Ireland's website. You can get free access to the census there. Public Records Office of Northern Ireland. Some of that stuff is online, some of it isn't. And then those commercial sites I mentioned. So just to show you what the census looks like, say I just searched for this in Ancestry because like I have a habit of doing that and I didn't feel like going to the National Library, the National Archives website. Here's Maggie McCann. She's 8 years old. This is my great grandmother. Lists her when she's born, where she's from, all that good stuff. And here are the rest of her family members. If you were to scroll down, there's a link that brings you to this page. Now, this notice up here about there being a new website, that has been there for over a year. And it's still there because we do things on Irish time. So eventually, I guess the links will change. They haven't yet. But when you want to actually look at the actual census, you would scroll down and click on one of these. So the household return is a thing, they'll have everyone's name on it. So you have the names, what religion, education level. So her father, Felix, he couldn't read, neither could his wife, but the kids were all literate. Says what people are doing for work, scholars, student. There's also the, this is the house and building return. So they wanted to know how many people are living in a particular place. How many are Protestant? How many are Methodist? Independent. I'm not sure what they meant by independent in 1901. Baptist, Quakers, how many Jewish people? Because yes, there were Jewish people in Ireland. And just all other things. This is the house and building return. So this is for an individual dwelling, and you can find what house your people were living in. Okay, why does this matter? It can give you an idea how much money somebody had. How many windows did they have? How many doors did they have? Because you at a certain time in history you were charged per window, per door, per chimney. So yeah. So if you want to get an idea of how much somebody might have been paying in taxes, you can look at this and see, okay, do they have a lot of windows or like one window and no chimney? This is what that new website looks like. Again, I don't know when it's going to show up, but this is what it will look like. This is probably in preparation for the 1926 census release in a few weeks. There's a joke that Irish people and Irish Americans are so desperate for records, we will look at anything, including dog licenses. Don't knock it till you try it. It's good because it'll put someone in a place at a time. So Marguerite Moore's husband, John Henry Moore, in 1870, he got a dog license from the court in Mobile, and it said he's living in Greencastle. Yeah, is it like super exciting and earth-shattering? Not necessarily, but if you can't find people, this kind of stuff is enough of a breadcrumb to keep you going. This is what the original record looks like. Here he is at the bottom. It says like even a description of the dog, which is funny to me. There's also the 1766 religious census. So that's on the virtual record treasury of Ireland. It is kind of incomplete. This is what it looks like. Again, it's a little bit of a wonky website. If you click on this view digital content button, this is what that looks like. And you can search within it. So it can search handwriting, it can search text, all that good stuff. But it will list inhabitants of a certain place in 1766, how many Protestants, how many Catholics. Again, without a regular census, like this is helpful. I just searched Hodges because again, searching a first and last name doesn't really work in this database. I did find a Thomas Hodges. Don't think he's my guy, but maybe a distant relative. So Griffith's valuation and the title allotment books, I talked a little bit about those, but it records like Griffith's valuation records property size, value type, all that good stuff. It is available for free on askaboutireland.ie. If you just Google Ask About Ireland Griffiths, you should find it pretty easily. There is a link in the handout. That, like I said, will only list heads of households, but it can identify neighbors, can identify relatives, because it'll list all the people living around your person. Well, Irish people like to live around their family members, unless they're my family, but I digress. So they can be really helpful, and you can cross-reference things with church books and other things to just confirm that it's the right person. Now, the records of tithes, so that's just a church tax paid by landholders, not landowners. Those are even those renters. It lists the land of, like, lists who the land occupiers are. Not necessarily laborers or urban dwellers. So most of Ireland is pretty rural. So unless they're living in Dublin, definitely try to use it if you're looking in this 1823 to 1870, 37 time frame. It's like the best pre-famine population record we're really gonna get. So this is what Ask About Ireland looks like. I just searched Hodges and Wicklow, which is where the first Samuel Hodges was from, well, where he lived later on. And I find him in this line right here. Now, if I click on this details button, you get this box. You can search the Griffiths valuation in Ancestry, but it won't give you the year of printing. It won't tell you what year it is, so it can be anywhere in this kind of big chunk of time. This actually gives you a year. Yes, they were in this place at this time. This map sheet reference number is kind of cool because you can look at the map and see where houses are and all that stuff. So this is what the original record looks like. He's on here somewhere. He's on here somewhere. Further down. Samuel Hodges, and he's renting from the Earl of Meath. He had a house and garden, and this is just like tax related stuff. Now, I went to Bray back in November to see if I could figure out where they were living. Couldn't exactly figure out where they were living, but I found the Coast Guard station, and the building is still there. It's like a boat, like a sailing school or something, which is kind of interesting. Nearby, you have this Ferry Hill, which I can confirm is a parking lot now because I tried to park there. One of the things about the map is if you're visiting Ireland and you're looking at this and you're like, okay, where is this in relation to modern day? You can look at it like this. I only bring this up because we get a lot of people in the library trying to figure out where their people were from because they want to visit. Tie the Plowman books, you would search for it on the National Archives website. I would try searching a surname, unless it's like, again, Murphy, then you might want to add a little more information. So that's what these look like. Again, not a ton of information, but puts your people in a place. We are like so out of time, so I'm just flying through. Estate records, sometimes they're helpful. You might see rent rolls or lease agreements. They're not as easy to find, but if you're going to find them anywhere, you're going to find them in Ireland, not digitized. So that's when you need to start just contacting people, contacting these archives and libraries. You also have the Registry of Deeds over here on the right. This will show you Protestant landowners because it was created to protect them. And it's located in Dublin, and there's limited online access. That means you have to be in Dublin on their computers using it. Okay, so there are land records for Family Search, like on Family Search for Ireland. I was just using Ireland's Family Search's full text search and just narrowed it down. I searched the name of Marguerite Moore's father, and I was able to find him in some of these. So this is just the general index, and the full text search will give you a transcription for those records that are particularly hard to read. Court records, really the thing you want to look at is the probate records. Even if you're like, okay, my people were poor, they're not going to be in here, look anyway. Because there might be something about their right to occupy their house. Best place, in my opinion, to look for those is Find My Past. which again, you can get into for free in the library. So this will cover 1858 through 1965. I found Mary Jane Nagle, so that's Marguerite Moore's mother, and it does send you a link, a really handy link to the National Archives website. Brings you here, and then you can click on the image button and actually see what it looks like. So this is an abstract, so it's not the full thing. The full thing was destroyed in 1922, but at least we have this. So Garrett Nagel, he died before Mary Jane, so all of this has to do with their estate, essentially. Okay, so this is just the court hierarchy. This could be a whole other presentation, so I'm not going to dwell a ton on this, but assizes are for like murder. Quarter sessions, that's like it required a jury. It's held 4 times a year. Petty sessions are the things you're going to see most often. The example I'm going to show of this, well, okay, here are the examples of what those are. Quarter sessions is going to be like land disputes, debt collection, minor theft, issues with livestock, also liquor licensing problems. Where you'll find those, most assizes were destroyed in 1922. Quarter sessions have a better survival rate, but the petty sessions, they are pretty complete, and you can find those online. Okay, so they were replaced in 1924 by district courts, but for a good chunk of time, this is what these courts were called. Common types of cases is like merchants not paying duty, wandering calf, people suing each other, public drunkenness, you know, kind of petty stuff. Okay. So this is what one of those records looks like. See how damaged this is? This is a good example of why people aren't finding things, because so many records, if they did survive, they look like this. I mean, you wouldn't be able to read these names in this column. So the example I pulled up was Mary Jane Nagel. There's a lawsuit regarding her estate in County Waterford, and this is just a little bit of information about that. Look through that. Okay, so this record, I mentioned people misbehaving. This is one of my ancestors on my mother's side. He got into all kinds of trouble with his neighbor. They were constantly fighting, so much so that he went to his neighbor's house and started ripping the thatch roof down. Another record says that he lit the neighbor's roof on fire. And then the whole family immigrated shortly after. I wonder why. Newspapers, if anyone wants to take a picture of this or screenshot it, they can. But I did mention like the best newspaper databases in that handout. Irish Newspaper Archives, it's really good, but it is subscription based. British Newspaper Archive is subscription based as well, but you can get into it for free in here. Same deal with Find My Past, Ireland newspapers. You would think it's separate from, it's like the same thing as British Newspaper Archive. It's not, even though they kind of live within each other. And as far as like research strategies, search all the variant spelling names, just all of them, and look in newspapers both where they're from and where they ended up. I mentioned Marguerite Moore. She died in 1933, and her hometown newspaper, and she had been gone since 1884, put an obituary in, asking the community, though, who knew this woman? Any of you know her? Is anyone still alive that knew this woman? Because she lived to be quite elderly, but I found that really interesting. I wouldn't have even thought to go back to Ireland and look, but apparently someone got a copy of her obit and shared it. Now, if you're looking for, I want to show just a quick example of names of vessels that have arrived and cleared out. So these are departing ships. This is really good for the 1700s. The best ones to look at for this is Belfast Newsletter, Freeman's Journal, and Gore's Liverpool General Advertiser. Pre-Great Famine provinces of opportunity and the season of immigration. These are just ads where they're, you know, advertising adventure if you come, advertising place to live if you come over. Where you would find these, if you're on Find My Past and scroll down the page, you would click on newspapers and publications in the world, and you can search within there. Now, the British Newspaper Archive, it looks a lot like Find My Past, it's because they took it over, but you can get into this for free in the library as well. I would be kind of vague with your searches because the optical character recognition is not that great. Certainly not like the older it goes. These are just some other key resources. We're not going to get into all of these, but workhouse and poor law records, search in those even if you think your people weren't that poor, because you'll find some surprising people in here. There are also military records, do DNA, and also contact the local people. So this is an example of a poorhouse record. So this is for a workhouse in Dublin. My great-great-grandfather shows up on here. I suspect he was in there because he was might have had a drinking problem according to the record. But I digress. So this is just a little information on the poor law system. Again, if you're interested in this, take a screenshot. You can always email. But where those records live, you'll find a lot on Find My Past. You'll find more on additional some on Ancestry, but mostly you're going to find on Find My Past. Best way to find it is if you go back, if you click this All Record Sets button, click Poor, filter to Ireland, you'll get this whole list of records. Search in multiple. This is that one for Robert Hodges from 1863. He's only 18, but I know it's him because he's working for the railroad. His father was living at Green Lanes. It all just lines up a little too well. And this is what that record looks like. He's down at the bottom. Name, marital status, age over here. Porter for the railroad, it says Protestant. And this is just the other side. And it says when he left. So British Army records, I recommend looking at this on Find My Past because it's easier to use than the National Archives website. Their catalog is real confusing. If this is something you're interested in digging into, talk to the library. We will help you because, like I said, it's a little complicated. You can find those on Find My Past doing the same thing with that catalog by searching Ireland and then searching military, and it gives you this list of records to search through. Same deal with Ancestry. Filter to military, filter by location, and it gives you this list of 19 to look through. There's some in here that are kind of recent, but still worth looking at. And then the last thing, because I am like so over time, guys, I'm sorry, is contact the people in Ireland. They're very nice people. They're very nice. Contact those county libraries and archives. You never know what they have. Sometimes they have things that are not even cataloged, so you don't know what they have until you ask. Same deal for Irish Heritage Centers and local historical societies. And if you're planning on going, contact those places, those archives or libraries ahead of time. So if you want to go and do research, it's fun. Contact them ahead of time and make sure you know all the various like rules of the place going in, because like some have rules about you can't bring a backpack in, you can't bring like anything in. So it's good to just ask. Okay, so it's time for questions. I know that there gotta be questions in the Q&A, and I saw some things in chat, but are there any questions in the room before I get into these? No? Okay, so the one question I'm seeing is, can you repeat the 3 newspapers that are listed as good places to look for ships departing? I think it was from Belfast. Yes, that was the Belfast Newsletter, the Freeman's Journal, and Gore's Liverpool General Advertiser. You can take a screenshot of this if you need to. Well, we've gone on a journey. Thanks for sticking it out. It's always hard to do an overview for a country. So I don't see any other questions. So I think Mike has some final things to go over before we wrap up. Thank you.
Just one thing. So our programs are always the second Wednesday of every month from September through May. I can't believe that the next program is April's second to last program for this year already. is going to be researching your revolutionary ancestors for America 250, presented by Scott Norick. And we have these cards in the back, if you didn't pick one up. So it's April 8th, 7 o'clock in this room. So thanks everyone for attending, and good night.